What's going on, guys? Welcome back. Caffeine and Cash Practice. Danny Matei here with Physical Therapy Biz, helping you start, run, and scale your cash or hybrid practice all around the country. Now, today I want to talk about a topic that is running rampant within not just our profession, but healthcare in general, and that's burnout. And burnout for me, I've experienced. Many of you maybe have experienced like professional burnout as well. I feel like you can feel this a number of ways. You can feel it as a student. You can feel it as a parent. You can feel it in your profession. And for us, that's what we're going to talk about today because, you know, we unless you have a trust fund or you've made a significant amount of money that is producing a bunch of cash, passive cash flow, you got to work, right? You got to make an income. And if your job is stressing you out so much that is affecting other areas outside of that, it's a huge problem. Because if you're drained at the end of the day, you're not content with your career, with the direction that things are going, it's going to affect the most important relationships you have outside of work. And those are the people that matter the most, your friends, your family, you know, your loved ones, your community. And for many people in our profession, what we're seeing is they leave a little piece of themselves, a little part of them at the clinic, at their job every single time. And it slowly sort of like wears them out. And then they start to question whether they even want to be involved in the career anymore. I see this in a number of ways, right? So for me, this happened to me towards the end of my career when I was in the Army. So I had been assigned to a infantry brigade in Hawaii, which I loved. It was awesome. They basically dropped me in this gym with an office that was connected to it. And they kind of just said, hey man, you're in charge of treating injuries, of injury prevention, and human performance optimization. So we want you to get involved in like the physical training programs to really help improve those. And I was just like in the best spot I've ever been. I loved it. I would have stayed there my entire career if that would have been, you know, an option, but it wasn't. So next job I had, I got put back into a traditional hospital clinic, but it was a satellite clinic that was attached to the airborne school down at Fort Benning. So I would see like jump injuries, and it sounds cool, but honestly, most injuries you see coming out of airborne school are like ankle sprains, little knee sprain, you know, so you see some weird trauma and things like that. But the challenge was my hours and the volume was really challenging because we would have sick call in the morning, and sick call, you know, you'd have 10 to maybe 30 people that would roll through, and depending on who could be there for that, you know, it could be a lot of volume, and you're not really like changing much. You're basically just trying to get people through training. It's a few week long course for airborne school. So we were just basically trying to like, you know, patch people up to get them through training so they get healthy when they got to their next assignment. And then after that, I would see a lot of people that were actually cadre, people that were training there, and people that were like leaving service. So a big chunk of what I was doing was working with people that were trying to get documentation for injuries that they had prior to leaving service so that they would have a VA record as far as their injuries are concerned and documentation for that. So it wasn't like people were necessarily just like trying to get better. In fact, many people would come in and they'd be like, hey, I just want to get this documented. I'm only in for like another couple months. We're not going to make a whole lot of headway. Plus I couldn't even get him back in for like 3 or 4 weeks if I wanted to. So I went into this position where I was just high. The volume was high. The patient population was not what I enjoyed as much. And I had just come off a really great assignment, and it made it even worse, honestly. So I was burnt out. I would, you know, have a hard time waking up. I would have a hard time, you know, after lunch. I would just be like living off of caffeine, and I just didn't feel engaged in my job. And I knew when I would come home, I would be so tired, and I would just fall asleep on the couch every day. You know, I would be home probably around like 4 o'clock. We'd start sick call at 6, and I would just fall asleep every single day. And that never happened to me. I'm not like a guy that takes naps. Like that's not the way I am. Energy is not a problem for me. And one day my wife said to me, she's like, you are just mopey. Like you do not seem happy, and you need to figure out what you need to do because we need you back to the way you're supposed to be. And I was a shell of that person by that point because I was just so frustrated. I didn't know what to do. So I felt compelled to stay in the Army. It's something I wanted to do. I enjoyed the service. I enjoyed the career, but it wasn't lining up with what my goals were from the standpoint of a day-to-day work environment. And so made a decision to leave and made a change and changed locations, changed environments. So for me, that's how my burnout was it happened and then resolved. And for me, that meant leaving the military and then starting a cash practice. And that cash practice, I worked my ass off in. And many of you that have started a business or are thinking about starting a business, it's a lot of work. But I never ever felt that same sort of wear and tear mentally of just being so exhausted that I just needed to take a nap, middle of the day. That never happened to me because I was in a different environment. I was in a more engaged environment. So if you're dealing with clinical burnout, most people, it's because of high volume in the clinical setting. That's usually one part of it. The other one is that you're not satisfied with the patient population that you're working with. I have a good friend of mine that works in a primarily work comp and personal injury practice. He's a ortho PA, and it's a good job. It's done. I mean, it's just really good in terms of like providing for his family. But the clinical setting, it's not necessarily the clinical setting. It's the population. He works primarily with populations that kind of don't want to get better because they're going through litigation, they're going through work comp claims. So every time that they come in, he's trying to help them get better, and it's not really advantageous for them to do so if they're in the middle of a legal case, right? Makes sense. They're not going to get compensated as much. So it's frustrating as a clinician to try to help people and they don't want your help, or not yet. Like, they just need to have the documentation done. They need to do the steps so they can get their compensation. And it's just part of their process. But for people like myself and for this guy we view ourselves as this is more than a job. It's a thing that we want to be really good at. It's a thing we take a lot of pride in, being to help people and get outcomes. The importance of that in many cases trumps the monetary side of things, because we're artists. It's what we want to be, world class at. And you put somebody in that environment and they get really frustrated really fast. So if that's you, I can completely see why that would burn you out. The other big thing is just high volume. Listen, if you're seeing 20 plus people a day, if you go to the clinic and you're like praying, please let me have some cancellations. Please let me have some no-shows, because I gotta, have some gaps in my schedule to be able to catch up on all this documentation. Otherwise, you're staying after for an hour and you're documenting all during lunch, maybe catching up on a Saturday morning. Like, you can only do that for so long before the sheer volume of that starts to wear you down. And in that case, we see people start to look for other alternatives. So I'm gonna give you a couple things you can look at, a couple of strategies to help with burnout, just based off of my experience and all the clinicians that we have helped along the way as well, and alleviate some of that burnout so that you have a lot left over for your family at the end of the day. So the first thing you can focus on, number one, is focus on learning. Focus on getting better at something. Now, this could be in the clinic. This could be focusing on improving your clinical skills in some way, whatever that might be. For a lot of people that we work with, they end up having to turn their attention, turn their focus, and learn a lot of things about business, about sales and marketing and systems and hiring. And now all of a sudden they're learning again. They're progressing mentally. They're progressing in their life in some positive way. For you, this might be, hey, I'm staying in the same job, but I need to focus on learning more about something else. So maybe it's physically learning more about what you need to do to take care of your own health and diving into things that are interesting to you and getting that, momentum from making changes and learning and progressing. That's one of the best ways to really deal with burnout, because when we feel stagnant, we feel like we're not really going anywhere. It's almost like a shark, right? We stop swimming, then we die. We got to have constant momentum and movement in order to feel like we're making progress. So learning something new and diving into focusing on something new is a big one. The next one is changing your environment. So maybe the clinic that you're at isn't the best place for you. Maybe you change your environment. I talked to somebody the other day, randomly, actually I met this person whenever I was on vacation. We're sitting in this hot tub. I'm with my wife and my kids, and these two ladies come over that were on vacation together, and we start talking, and they ask me what I do, and I always tell people I'm a physical therapist because that's what I am. And one of these other ladies was a physical therapist as well. So we just strike up a conversation, and she had been in the sports med sort of side of the world, and outpatient ortho, and she got super burnt out by the volume of that. And when she had a family, she decided, all right, well, she was going to change up, and she actually moved to home health. And she goes, you know what's weird? I never thought, like, this is somebody that was working with like professional teams. She goes, I never thought that I would enjoy home health, but she likes the challenge of different environments and different people and being able to kind of be, lower volume and have better compensation. So I totally get it. So she changed her environment. Not the environment that I think I would have done well in, but for her, it's the environment that made a big difference, and it's a lot more sustainable for her because of that. So changing your environment can be big. Maybe it's just another clinic where their volume maybe isn't so demanding, or they have a population of people that are coming in that's more interesting to you. Either way, changing your environment is huge. The last environment change you can make is making this the shift to where you're gonna start your own practice. So for a lot of people, they get to that point, they don't wanna do it. I call these people reluctant entrepreneurs like myself. I didn't have any desire whatsoever to start a business. It was not on my radar one bit. And I just didn't really have any other options that I felt were gonna line up with what I wanted to do. So for me, going and starting a practice, that changed my environment dramatically. It also forced me to learn things, which is two of the things that I'm talking about. And all of a sudden I was like so excited to wake up in the morning. You know, I just had so much energy. It was a huge difference. But for a lot of people, that may not be the best option for you. Obviously, it's what I did, it's what we help people with, but burnout's a much bigger issue than just an entrepreneurship, physical therapy, problem, right? So changing your environment, learning a new skill, or focusing on something is big. The other thing is being able to even add in potentially some remote work. So maybe your company allows you to do some telehealth work. This gives you some flexibility in your schedule, gives you an opportunity to work from home, maybe a day a week, 2 days a week, have some flexibility. If you have a young family and you're a mother, like it's tough going back to the clinic. You have such a strict schedule, and it's like you have these very strict meetings lined up for weeks at a time sometimes. So it can feel very overwhelming. And if you can have some sort of remote work, some flexibility with that, that can make a big difference. Even if it's only 1 day a week, it can give you a break mentally from some of the challenges of the intensity of the clinic. So if you are in your own practice, that might be scheduling your patients on like 3 days mainly, clinic days, and then having 2 days you're batching to take care of other things for the business. Maybe if you have staff clinicians, within your own practice, they've got 3-4 days in the clinic, and then they're able to do something remotely, whether that be content development, whether that be telehealth, working with people that way. Maybe they're programming for people remotely. Any number of things where you can have some variation of remote and in-person work that breaks up some of the monotony and decreases some of the burnout, which allows us to function in the profession for a longer period of time. The last thing, and this is something that for some people it is the right thing to do, and that's to look outside the clinical world. So for me, I'm obviously a huge advocate for the profession. I think it's one of the best jobs in the world. And I think for most people, the high volume setting is gonna burn you out. When I see people move to a low volume setting, in particular like a cash or a hybrid practice, and they're working with people they really enjoy working with, I see almost non-existent burnout. Like it pretty much goes away. In some cases it's still there. And if it still is, or if you're just at a point where you're like, man, I just, look, I was 22 when I got into PT school. I was 25 when I graduated, and I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I thought this is what I wanted, and it's not what I wanted, and it's getting reinforced when you go to the clinic because you're burnt out and you don't feel compelled to want to be an amazing clinician and to really focus on progressing and be a lifelong learner in that profession that can feel exhausting. Then maybe for you need to look outside the profession. And if you look at it, the skill sets that you've developed, you're very marketable, you're very employable in a number of areas that have nothing to do with treating patients, because you're a great communicator, you have a doctorate in most cases, for God's sakes, like you've shown people you can stick with things for a long time, you're smart, right? And also you're a great problem solver. You can get plugged into any number of large corporations and you're just gonna thrive, because also you're great with people. You're a great communicator, you have great interpersonal skills and emotional intelligence. I mean, for God's sakes, they put you in a role of customer success or some sort of sales position, and you're gonna do great if you wanna leave the profession, and that's up to you. And I think that's something that you have to decide if that's the direction that makes the most sense for you. And it's not the right fit for everybody, but it's not the right fit for everybody to just start a cash practice and just say to themselves like, hey, I'm just gonna go this route, I'm gonna start my own practice and I'm gonna focus on this niche, because that might not be what you ultimately need to do. So if we're looking at burnout, there's really 4 main areas. Number 1, focus on learning. Number 2, change your environment. Go to another practice, maybe try a different clinical setting. Maybe it's an environment you start for yourself, like I did, which is a cash practice. Add in remote work where you can work from home. or you can work, from another setting at some point, or use your brain in a slightly different way, a day a week, maybe 2 days a week. And then lastly, if it really comes down to it, transfer outside the clinical world and make sure that you make the transition to whatever it is that you find meaning in, and use the amazing skills that you develop as a clinician through all the school we went through, all the reps that we get, all the human exposure and conversations that we have to be able to have, and use that in a way to crush it in another profession and have success there. And you'll know what the right fit is for you because you'll feel it. You'll feel if you're excited to wake up. And if you're not excited to wake up, you're not doing the right thing. And if you're not doing that, you got to ask yourself just how much regret you're going to have one day if you just keep chipping away at the wrong thing and wasting your life hating what you do for a living, because you got to spend so much time there. So guys, I hope this helps. This isn't all about just starting businesses and cash practices, which is obviously what we do. We're biased. It's where I've had a lot of success and gotten rid of a lot of burnout by doing so. But I just hope that you take what you learn in the profession and you can redirect that and find some happiness in a different place. And if you can't, then understand that you're very, very valuable, very marketable, and you can get a job damn near anywhere and crush it outside of the profession if that's the right fit for you. So guys, if you are looking to get some help transitioning potentially to a cash practice, growing a cash practice, scaling to multiple clinicians, within that, or a hybrid practice, head over to physicaltherapybiz.com. Check out what we got going on. I think we have some really cool resources that can help you out. And if nothing else, you get a better idea about, what we do, who we help, the number of people that we actually work with at this point, and all the stuff that I share with you is not based on theory. This is based on data and reps with the hundreds of businesses that we work with on an actual monthly basis, in their businesses, helping them along the way. So if you want to learn more, head to physicaltherapybiz.com. And as always, thanks for watching. I'll catch you next week.